Cracking. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed last evening. I think it was a lovely evening. Some of you may have even mightn't have gone to bed too happy with the result of the Eurovision, but there you are. Can't win all the time. We're going to start with, as you see from the programme, with what's called other related electoral issues. Now, these are on your... They're on the second ballot paper, and they're issues that arose in the course of the discussion yesterday. So they are issues which may, with your approval, be the subject of beyond the ballot paper that you'll be voting on a little bit later on. And I think it would be very helpful, as part of the whole process, that Jane Souter is going to talk us through in brief detail each of these issues. So what's involved on, when we talk about the size of constituencies, what's the background to this? What is it, if you're going to vote on it, you might actually be voting on. So can I hand over to Jane, please? Thanks.
Okay, so when we went through all of the notes and everything yesterday and listened to it, we saw there was, I think, 11 different kind of things that came up. So these are all the kind of things that you might want to hear more about in our next weekend. So we just thought, just in kind of 5 minutes, just go through what the different ones are. So the first one there, the size of constituencies. At the moment, all constituencies have somewhere either 3, 4 or 5 TDs. The Constitution says there's a minimum of 3. But the larger the number of TDs in any constituency, the more proportional it is. In other words, the more the actual outcome matches what the votes are. The larger the number, the fewer the seat bonuses for larger parties, and the more opportunities perhaps for women, which could be in line with previous convention decisions on the first weekend on the role of women. The non-geographic constituencies, this is for those, because obviously there's divided opinion on localism, whether it's something that we want to see more of or less of. But for those who have identified localism as a problem, there is a possibility that constituencies wouldn't have to be geographic. Like if you look at the Shannon, for example, the constituencies can come from an industrial panel or an agricultural panel. Or you could have alphabetical constituents. You know what I mean? There's loads of different ways, or numeric ones. Or we could just have one national constituency, such as in the Netherlands. The third one there is on by-elections. So the thinking here is it fair that voters in one constituency halfway through a Dáil sitting might get to change the numbers in the Dáil, or get to change the government majority. So there's other ways that we could replace vacancies. So you could recount the last vote without the person who's gone, or you could have substitutes, which is what we have in European elections and local elections. The next one is the ballot papers. So we know that there's a certain amount of alphabetical voting. So Tom there, being an Arnold, is going to do better than I would as a Souter, all other things being equal. So would you want to have them randomised or different ways other than A to Z? Now, obviously, if you had very big constituencies with a lot of names on the list, they might have to be organised by party or something, because it would be very hard to be able to find the different names if they weren't alphabetical. The next one is compulsory voting. That came up a good bit at the different tables. We might want to think more about it. Other countries such as Australia have it. I just noticed I skipped over the number of TDs. So it's stipulated in the Constitution that there has to be a certain number of TDs per head of population. And as the population of the country has grown over time, so has the number of TDs. So there's going to be a slight reduction in the next election to 8, but that's 8 fewer, but that's as far as you can go with the existing constitution. So some people think we should have more TDs and some people think we've less. Is that something that you want to talk more about? Non-parliamentary ministers. So the Constitution says all ministers have to be from the Oireachtas. So in other words, they have to be members of either the Dáil or the Seanad. Two can be members of the Seanad, but that's rarely used. But in other countries, like in the US and in Sweden, ministers aren't elected MPs or TDs. They're completely separate. Or in a lot of other European countries, ministers have to resign from their own constituencies and substitutes go in when they become ministers in order to reduce the kind of local focus of ministers. There was talk about would we like to see, some people thought we'd like to see more independence, and some people thought we'd like to see fewer independence. So again, is that something that we want to discuss? Establishing an electoral commission came up in quite a few places. Nora Owen said it well. So an electoral commission is a good way of establishing best practice on how to minister elections. The current programme for government talks about it, and it could mean that there'd be a standing referendum commission. So every time the government's going to have a referendum, they don't have to scramble and set up a new one and appoint a different judge, and then the whole thing gets delayed. So that would be one thing. The next one is direct democracy. So that involves the rights of citizens to petition for referendums themselves. So you could say get 50,000 signatories and you'd bring it to the government and you'd have to have a referendum on that issue. So is that something that we want to talk about? And then the last thing is term limits for TDs. So that would mean that, say, for example, you could only have 2 or 3 terms. So it would obviously increase the turnover. There'd be more and newer faces, but you'd also lose a lot of experience. So, there's pros and cons. So again, if that's something we want to talk about. So I think we have a few minutes now for any questions about any of them.
I mean, at the end of the day, you'll be asked of the issues that are on the ballot paper to rank them in order of preference as to what it is you think is most important to talk about. And that would determine then, or at least in part determine, the agenda for the next meeting in June. So any questions to Jane or maybe some of the other panellists here on any of these issues that are mentioned? Are there microphones available if we do need, if somebody does want to ask a question? Yeah, okay. We'll get one to you, Katrina, when we... Yeah, okay. Thank you.
We're all a bit slow starting this morning. The size of... I'm just asking a question about European constituencies and where it might fit in here, because I know it was something we discussed at our table yesterday. And if we were to look at... there's different potential... possibilities for European constituencies. One is you continue as is, though I don't believe that's a very fair way of doing it. Or the other is that you could have just one constituency list. Well, ideally, eventually on the island of Ireland, just one, 32 counties. But in the interim, 26 county, that you just have one list of European constituencies, and that would give a much fairer balance for all different parties and non-parties. And I'm just wondering, where would that come in here? Would that be size of constituencies, or are we just talking about general election here?
I think our specific term of reference is general elections rather than European elections. Yeah, so it is, for the purposes of this convention, it's the Dáil electoral system we're talking about. If that matter were to be dealt with, it would be a matter to be dealt with at European level, I assume, and there'd have to be European agreement to that. Would that be right?
Well, we could do it if we wanted to, but there wasn't. In fairness, there wasn't much of a sense coming from the floor yesterday that other elections would be discussed, and as the chair has been saying, the mandate really is to discuss the Dáil electoral system. So that's been the working assumption.
Okay. There was a question, firstly David, then Catherine, then Robert, and there was another hand which I saw. Anyway, if we
My name is David
Cullinan.
Thank you. Just two very quick questions. First, in relation to item 6, compulsory voting. I think there was a wider discussion at a lot of the tables in relation to increasing the franchise and voter turnout. Compulsory voting is only part of it. I mean, there was issues like increasing the number of days in which a ballot could be taken, looking at the voter registration system, postal votes, all of that. So maybe increasing the, looking at ways to increase the franchise and so on would be maybe a better way to deal with it. And also the issue of, sorry, I can't pronounce it now, proportionality, sorry, is also important and should be looked at. And item 10, again, I think the issue of democracy, in the way it's phrased, I think needs to be changed as well in terms of item 10. But the main point is in relation to item 6.
Okay, we can probably take that on board. Let's take some more comments. Catherine.
Yeah, just looking at the, Catherine Murphy, just looking at the list of items, some of them don't actually require a constitutional change. And if this is the Constitutional Convention, you know, should we not be limiting ourselves to things that should change, that we can make a recommendation to change the Constitution? For example, the size of the constituencies doesn't require a constitutional change. For example, just on the issue of independence, the political parties are not actually referred to in the Constitution. So how would you consider that should be changed? Is it you'd be obliged to become a member of a political party if you know, there's things like that. It's just that maybe we might differentiate between the things that do require constitutional change and those that don't. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I mean, just on this, I mean, the context of a listing like this is if, for example, within the existing electoral system, there are a number of changes which could be made. Indeed, of course, they could be made without constitutional change. But it would be a follow-on if, for example, the convention was to vote to say, you know, they either predominantly or exclusively or perhaps with another system would like the PRT system to remain, PRSTV system to remain. These are things, if you like, which are part of the wider agenda for political change, I think, which follows on from that. Okay, and that's a very good point. Art's saying to me we could highlight the ones on the ballot paper which would actually require constitutional change. That actually could help it.
Chair, could I add, sorry, but it could be that you could also make a constitutional change. So it's not impossible that the convention might decide that they want to write into the constitution a minimum size of constituencies. It's possible. That's
yeah. Okay. I think just in order of seeing, Joanna, did you express a wish to speak?
No,
okay.
It was just, well, there was an issue that came up at our table, which was to do with the, you know, the distribution of the surplus in, you know, under PRSTV in Dáil general elections, and just, you know, in relation to the point made there by Catherine about the constitutional and the size of the constituencies. Well, there is a, under the Constitution it says, you know, it has a 3-seater as the kind of bottom line, and, you know, you could change that. You could ban 3-seaters by amending the Constitution, just to make that point as well.
Sure, no, I appreciate that. There are things in the Constitution which determine the size of constituencies. Robert, I think you were next, and then Michelle.
Thanks. One thing that I think came up that isn't up there are different types of electoral system. So I'm just wondering if that can be added. And just as an aside, there's a need to review the whole way the electoral register is done. I think there'd be no harm if a message went to the government on that, because it's extremely inefficient the way the present system works. Thanks.
I mean, Robert, the first ballot paper covers your first point when you have a look at it. Sorry, who did I say next? Michelle, I think, and then John.
Thank you. Good morning. Just further to my contribution yesterday, what I would actually seek is that we examine the possibility of changing Article 16, which allows for TDs, the numbers of TDs proportionate to population alone. I'm asking that we look at least consider maybe different possibilities as they exist in other systems, that it might be more nuanced based on geography, identity and so on. That would form part of what we might discuss the next day, and that we might tease out issues around that.
Okay, all right. John, I think, was next. And then Maureen. Okay.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I think that it is tremendously important that we would give a high preference to the establishment of an electoral commission by reason of the fact that it would take party politics out of any interference role with how our elections are conducted into the future. And I think it would be there to cover many of the points that are listed in that 11 list that is behind you. It would make take a great burden off the electorate's worry and concern about issues red herrings that come up from time to time across the media. And it would focus an attention on the best suited ways with an independent elected commission. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that may well be a view that's widely shared. Maureen, you're next. Behind you.
Maureen O'Sullivan. Are we not including on the ballot paper an option of no change?
Yeah. But again, that's the first paper, the first ballot paper, which we'll go on to discuss in a bit more detail now.
Okay, no, I just looked at it and there was only the two options. Sorry. No, sorry, and can I just, the other question then is, I want to support what Robert said about the electoral register.
Yeah.
I think the political reps here know the discrepancies on that register, and there is a real need to look at that between people moving, people dying, and they're still on the register. And the other one, when we were talking about compulsory voting here, we were looking at the issue of when people know they're going to be away at the time of an election, and that there's no real facility for people who want to vote, but they're just not going to be in the country unless they can prove they're on business abroad. So I wonder, could we look at that also? Thank you.
I mean, and this does go back, I think, to the point, Catherine, the things that could be done anyway without any constitutional change and other things that... David, you're coming in.
If you don't mind to come in, because between Maureen and Robert and David, it suggests to me, if there was an agreement, that there might be an additional item to add, which we could think of how we might call it, but it's to do with access to votes, whether you vote on more than one day, whether you postal vote, whether you can vote in all sorts of other ways, measures to increase turnout, whether we deal with the electoral registrar. So it could be measures to increase turnout, could be an additional item to add.
I think just as my sense is that we're beginning almost to stray between the two ballot papers, and it would probably make more sense if we went on to David explaining the first ballot paper now, because I think, then we'll see the thing in the round, I think, a bit better.